Welcome to the podcast of Life Change Church, where we exist to love people to life change. We hope that this podcast is both challenging and encouraging to you. Enjoy the message.
All right, well, good morning. Hey, we're excited you're here as we are in a sermon series entitled 7. But again, I want to remind you tonight, though, before we jump into the sermon series, we do have our Connect Hangout. I just checked the weather right now. There's only a 60% chance of rain. We're looking good, right? We're looking good for us. So we're going to pray that it doesn't rain. But if it does, we're going to bring it inside, okay? So we're going to figure out ways to have some fun inside. We'll probably play cornhole over there, and then we'll still have food, we'll eat, we'll hang out, and that's the biggest thing. We just want to hang out and get connected with each other as well. So bring a side dish tonight. We will have hot dogs and buns provided by the church, but the rain plan is to come inside. We're going to do it regardless because we just want to hang out together. So, and then if is a rain out, that's an automatic forfeit by the student life. So, and the volleyball, so that's an automatic win for the adults. I just want to throw that out there, right? All right. So we're in the middle of a sermon series entitled 7, and what we've been doing is we've been looking at these 7 miracles that Jesus did before his death and resurrection in the book of John. We started off in this series about looking at how Jesus can turn our disappointment into astonishment by really looking at the miracle of him turning water into wine. And then we continued on and we learned how Jesus can turn our doubt into faith by looking at the miracle about the healing of the royal official's son. And what we learned is that faith removes the distance between us and a miracle. And then we studied the miracle about the man by the pool or the man on the mat. And we learned that Jesus' ability overrides our disability. And then last week for Mother's Day, if you're here, we learned about how Jesus fed the 5,000, and we learned that Jesus turns our insufficiency into abundance. So again, that's kind of like just a brief overview of this series so far. If you missed any of them, I challenge you to go back. You can check them all out at our website at www.mylifechangechurch.com. But through each one of these miracles, really what we're looking at and what we've seen is that these miracles happen because of an issue or a problem. Which really the central theme to this entire message is this, is that problems are a miracle opportunity. Problems are a miracle opportunity, right? We cannot experience a miracle without first having a problem. Again, if you look at Jesus, he didn't walk into these towns that were perfect. He didn't meet with people that had everything together, but instead, he met these people who had issues, who had struggles, who had problems. He walked into these towns where there was these issues that everybody was dealing with, and he embraced their problems. He met them at their place of need, and he embraces our problem as well. Really, through this series, what we can see is that Jesus meets us in our place of need. Jesus meets us within the middle of our problem. So today what we're going to do is really look how Jesus can even meet us in the middle of our storm. We're going to look at the 5th miracle, which in the book of John, which is where Jesus walked on water. So if you have your Bibles, go with me. This is in John chapter 6, and we're really going to study verses 16 through 24. So if you have your Bibles, go there with me. Again, if you don't have a Bible, we always push the Bible app, just a resource that you can put on your phone. That way you can actually pull your phone out in church, and it's not just because you're texting, it's because you're actually looking at the Bible, and then you can read your Bible every single day. We want to challenge you to read your Bible every single day. So today we're going to be here, John chapter 6. Let's start here at verse 16. It says this, it says, when evening came, his disciples went down to the lake, where they got into a boat and set off across the lake for Capernaum. By now it was dark, and Jesus had not yet joined them. Again, here's the disciples, right? They're coming off some incredible ministry. Like for them, things were going well. They were seeing Jesus do amazing things. Jesus was teaching, he was getting some things riled up with people, he's stirring up the religious leaders, but at the same time, he's doing these incredible miracles, right? So these disciples, they were really like on cloud 9. And like they had just seen Jesus feed 5,000 people with 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. In fact, they were even a part of that miracle. Like they benefited from it, right? They ate the 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. They ate some of that as well. But really, kind of behind the scenes, Jesus was trying to get away. Before he fed the 5,000, Jesus was trying to get away because really he needed some time with God. He needed some time with his Father because what had happened right before he fed the 5,000, what had happened is he heard that this guy named John the Baptist was actually beheaded. He had heard that John the Baptist was actually killed, and John the Baptist was a guy that kind of believed in Jesus. He was a guy that really set the tone for Jesus. He kind of set the way for Jesus. He shared about what was coming. He shared about Jesus and all this stuff. He was really like one of the only other people that was even partnering with Jesus. So Jesus learned about this, that his head was cut off. So he's like, man, I need to go spend some time with my Father, right? I need to go spend some time with God. So he tried to get away, but there was 5,000 people there, so he fed the 5,000. Then after the 5,000 people, then he decided, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to get away. And then the disciples just kind of left him there, right? They left him there to pray by himself. Verse 18, it continues on. It says, after they had left Jesus, it says, a strong wind was blowing and the waters grew rough. Really, the strong wind was blowing, right, and the water grew rough. The truth is, they were in the middle of a storm. Now, let's just think about a storm for a little bit. Like, how many of you guys like storms? For me, like, I like kind of like watching storms. Like, I like to like kind of sit out, and like maybe you like that. You get out on your front porch, you sit out there and you watch a storm. For us, we do this at home. We like go in the garage, we put the tailgate down on my truck, we get the family in there, and we watch a storm that's coming, right? As I say that out loud, it sounds super redneck, and I know I understand that. Like, you're a hill. So we're going to get out in the truck and watch ourselves a storm, fellas. No, that's what we do. It's kind of what we do. And then like we like to see all these things that happen. We like to listen to the thunder. We like to see the lightning. We like to see the rain. We go Forrest Gump. Rain's going sideways. Rain's going this way. Rain's coming up. And like we do all this, right? We like to see the wind blow the trees. It's fun until it gets to a certain point, right? Until the wind starts blowing in and we start getting wet, until it starts affecting us. Really, I think we all like a good storm until it affects us. Because the truth is, storms can do some damage. Storms can do some damage. Remember like 3 or 4 years ago, we had some terrible windstorms. Some of you guys probably might remember this. Like, it was crazy bad. Like, half of the county was without power for like almost a week. Now, we rarely lose power, so our house actually didn't lose power, but we did get some damage as well. We didn't lose power, we lost part of our roof. So some of the shingles blew off, and it was like 6 houses down. We're looking like, man, that's probably not good. Then it's raining like crazy. So next thing you know, there's actually some water damage in our ceiling as well. And the plywood was exposed. The plywood didn't fall off, but just the shingles did, but the plywood was exposed. And then all of a sudden, this kind of rain started doing a little bit of damage. It kind of leaked in, right? Because storms do some damage. And this was one of those storms that we're like, okay, we are not going to get in the back of the truck. We are not going to hillbilly us up. We are going to get inside. We're going to stay away from windows, and we're going to try to actually keep safe, right? There's some storms like that. And really, if you look at it, this is kind of where the disciples were. They're in the middle of this storm, but they're really not in a safety zone. They're in the middle of a lake on a boat. And I don't know if you've ever been on a lake in a boat, but it's not a really place to be where you want to be at when you're in the middle of a storm. If you look at the storm, though, it really kind of blindsided them. Like, they didn't have the weather app that I just looked and saw a 60% chance of rain. They looked out there and like, nope, looks pretty good. We're going to go on this lake, right? But what happened is they got blindsided by this storm. They got blindsided physically, they got blindsided emotionally, and even spiritually. Because again, they're coming off this high, right? They're coming off this thing where Jesus had done all these incredible things. Like, they think they could probably do anything in the world, and they get on this lake, and the next thing you know, they get hit by a storm. And it's kind of crazy. I think sometimes that's really where we find ourselves as well. I think really we can relate to the disciples. We can relate to this feeling. See, I think many of us, we've probably gone through a season where we felt things were going the right way, right? Things were going the way they should have been going, right? We were actually gaining some traction. There's some things rolling in our lives. We might even felt like we were on top of the world, like we're on our A game. Maybe we were healthy. We had a job, like we were able to pay our bills. Maybe even we're getting along with our spouse and our family, like everything is really just coming together. Things are making sense. And then next thing you know, boom, we hit a storm. There's a storm that comes and hits us. And next thing you know, we find ourselves in this rough situation. We find ourselves in this rough situation, really, and we end up far away from where we think we should be. We're getting hit by the waves of life, right? We're getting this wind that's blowing us here and there, and we have no idea how we got there, right? And we have no idea really where we're going. Again, this is exactly where the disciples found themselves. They were hanging out with Jesus. Everything was taken care of, and the next thing you know, they're in a boat in the middle of a storm by themselves. Verse 19 continues on. It says, when they had rowed about 3 or 4 miles away, they saw Jesus approaching the boat, walking on the water, and they were frightened. Here's the disciples, right? They're 3 or 4 miles away. And think about how they got to this situation. They rowed themselves. And really, if we look at it, we can find ourselves in the middle of storms because what did we do? We moved away from Jesus, right? The disciples, things were going great, and what did they do? They just left Jesus, and they got further and further away from him. And the next thing you know, they're in the middle of the storm, and they're frightened for their lives. And we do the same thing. The problem is, I think too many times we do the same thing. I've been guilty of this myself, right? When things are going well, we kind of get into this place where we just become complacent. We even become a little bit lazy. We become lax in our spiritual life. Instead of praying more when things are going well, instead of being thankful, giving thanks for all the things that God's done, what do? We pray less. Instead of spending more time in the Bible and seeing like, wow, this is crazy how all this stuff is coming true in my life. Like, God, you're doing amazing things, and it says right in the Bible. What do? We spend less time in His Word. Instead of coming to church more consistently, we think, you know what, I got this, everything's going good, and we slip into this kind of pattern where we kind of skip church here and there, right? We let things slip, and next thing you know, we're further and further away from Jesus. And what we're doing is really, we're putting this distance between Jesus and us. And what that is, it's sin. I mean, it sounds intense, but that's what it is. Sin removes us from our proximity to Jesus. Maybe you didn't feel like you're a bad person when you're doing these things, but if you're putting anything before God, it's sin. And sin always leads us further and further away from Him. And sin will always lead us deeper and deeper into the storm. And sin will always cause us to be far away from Jesus. And when we're far away from Jesus, our response is always fear. When we're not acting in obedience, we react with fear. This is where the disciples found themselves, really. And this is where we find ourselves a lot, too. And our initial reaction is fear. When we're in the middle of a storm, when we're in this dangerous place, our initial reaction is often fear. And when we respond with fear, what it does is it damages us, but it also damages those around us as well. Because fear causes us to panic, right? Fear, it really causes us to react irrationally. Many times fear causes us to run from the problem instead of facing it head on. And what fear does, it elevates the problem really to cause more harm than it does good. And this is what the storm does. When we find ourselves in the middle of a storm, this is what can happen. This is where the disciples were. What's interesting, though, is where Jesus was. Because if you look at Jesus, what do? He used this storm again. He used this problem. He used this issue to do a miracle. Because you see, Jesus began to walk, but it wasn't like a normal type of walk. It was like, I'm walking on water. Like, that's an amazing miracle. He was walking on water. But even before that, I think it's interesting. Even before that, Jesus, before he started walking on water, Jesus was watching after his disciples. He was watching them the whole time. If you cross-reference this story and you go to the version in Matthew, again, there's 4 Gospels. There's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And they're all kind of the perspective of Jesus' life and ministry from these 4 different perspectives. If you cross-reference this to Matthew chapter 14, verse 23, it states that Jesus was actually on the hill above the lake. It's saying that he went there to pray. And this hill is almost like a mountain that overlooked the entire lake. Like Jesus at the top of this, and he could see the whole lake from where he was. So really, he could see the disciples the whole time, right? This is incredible. And even as they're getting further and further away from him, Jesus was watching after them, right? He knew every detail of their storm. He saw the storm rolling in before they ever did. And he sees our storm as well. If you look at it, Jesus could see these disciples. They could see him anywhere they were on the lake. He could see what they were going through. He wasn't surprised by the storm. He wasn't freaking out about the storm, right? He wasn't wondering, I wonder where that storm came from. Oops, the disciples are out there. I should probably do something, right? No, it didn't take him by surprise. He watched it all. He saw every single detail. He knew every moment of fear those disciples faced. And again, he saw the problem as an opportunity for a miracle. So what did he do? He began to walk. He walked on water to the boat. That problem, that disconnect from his disciples to Jesus was a setup for a miracle. The storm was a setup for a miracle. And I want to challenge you, maybe you're right now, today, you are in a storm in your life. Let me encourage you this. Jesus knows the detail of that storm. Jesus knows every detail of that storm. He cares about your situation. He cares about the issues that you're going through. And he's not surprised about anything that you're going through, right? He's not second-guessing himself in it as well. In fact, he may even be letting you go through that moment. He may be letting you experience some of this so that he can begin walking to you, so that he can show you a miracle in your life. If you go back to verse 20 here, it says this, it says, but he said to them, it is I, don't be afraid. Then they were willing to take him into the boat, and immediately the boat reached the shore where they were heading. It says the boat reached the shore where they were heading, right? And here's something interesting here. The disciples, they really sat across the lake, and they were going to Capernaum. It says that right there in John. But again, if we cross-reference this to Matthew, they didn't end up in Capernaum. They ended up in a town called Gennesaret. And this is exactly where Jesus wanted them to go. I think sometimes in our lives, our storms, sometimes the things that we go through, they may redirect us, but they're redirecting us to exactly where Jesus wants us to go. Again, if you cross-reference this, Gennesaret is in Capernaum. They're only like 3 miles apart, and it may not seem like it's a big difference, but it's a big difference to the people in Gennesaret. If you look here in Matthew 14, verses 35 and 36, it says, when the people there recognized Jesus, they told people all around that Jesus had come, and they brought all the sick to them. They begged Jesus to let them touch just the edge of his coat, and all who touched it were healed. These people who were sick, these people who had need, these people who had never experienced Jesus before were able to experience it because Jesus gave direction to his disciples in the storm. Jesus had an incredible plan for his disciples. He had an incredible plan for what he was going to do. Instead of going to Capernaum, they went to Gennesaret where people needed to experience him, and people were healed. He used the storm to get the disciples there. And Jesus loved his disciples so much that even in the middle of the storm, he didn't allow them to be hurt. He didn't allow them to be destroyed. But what he did is he allowed them to get redirected. He gave purpose to really what they're going through. And I think through this miracle, yeah, it's amazing that Jesus walks on water, right? But through this miracle, what's more amazing is that Jesus brings purpose to the storm. And Jesus brings purpose to our storm as well. In fact, that's what I want you to get. If you walk away with nothing else from this story today, I want you to understand that Jesus brings purpose to our storm. And this is what this means. It means that every struggle, every financial burden, every job loss, every miscarriage, every broken relationship, every time somebody said a lie behind your back, every promise that you've experienced that was broken in your life, every pain that you've ever suffered, everything that you've ever gone through, it happened so that God could take us from where we think we needed to go to redirect us to what he really wanted us to go. He brings purpose to each one of those struggles. Because the truth is, there's some things we can't learn about our comforter unless we need comforted. There's some things we can't learn about our Prince of Peace unless we're at a place where we need to experience peace. There's some things we can't learn about our healer until we're at a place where we need to be healed. There's some things that we can't learn about our provider until we're at a place where we need for him to provide for us. Jesus brings purpose to our storms. And imagine what that looks like in your life, right? Imagine right now you might be in the middle of a complete amount of debt and you're completely buried in it. Maybe Jesus is taking to that storm. He's going to bring purpose to that. Maybe through that, you're going to learn how to budget. Through that, maybe you're even going to learn how to give and be obedient and become a good steward of what you have, right? Maybe right now you're in the middle of an addiction that you're struggling with, right? It's a storm that Jesus wants to bring purpose to. Through that addiction, maybe Jesus is trying to teach you self-control in every area of your life. Maybe right now you're dealing with a broken heart. Maybe you feel completely broken. Maybe it's a storm Jesus is taking you through so that you can experience his love. Jesus brings purpose to our storms. Even in our despair, he can bring hope. Let's finish up this passage here in verse 22. It says, the next day the crowd that had stayed on the opposite shore of the lake realized that only one boat had been there and that Jesus had not entered it with his disciples, but they had gone away alone. So again, here's the crowd, right? They didn't know exactly what had happened, but they knew something was going on. They knew that Jesus didn't get on the boat, but he's not there anymore, so something happened. Jesus did something, so they wanted to check it out. Then in verse 23, it says, then some boats from Tiberias landed near the place where the people had eaten the bread after the Lord had given thanks. Once the crowd realized that neither Jesus nor his disciples were there, they got into the boats and went to Capernaum in search for Jesus. The crowd really just wanted to see the show. They got to Capernaum, they're 3 miles off, right? But what they weren't going for Jesus, what they were going for is they wanted just to see the miracle for the sake of a miracle. But from this series, from every miracle that we've seen Jesus do, we see that it's intentional. We see that there's purpose behind it. It's not just for the show, but it's always to help others. It's always to lead others back to God. It was always to meet people at the place of need. And through this miracle, and we see how Jesus not only meets us at our place of need, he meets us at our problem and our issue, but he also brings purpose to that place of need. He brings purpose to that issue. Jesus brings purpose to our storms. And I think about it, if we think about it, through all the storms in our life, you can check back and you can look back in your life and you can see the purpose of all the things that you've gone through. Again, if you go back to the story of Sarah and I's roof getting blown off, a little bit of water damage there, like it's just a material thing. But what happened was it was scary, it was kind of frustrating for us because we're like, okay, now we have water damage, what are we going to do? But what's amazing is because of insurance, we were able to get a whole new roof. Like, come on, like it was amazing. But really, that's just a tiny thing. I mean, God's done some incredible things in our lives too. There's things that we've gone through. There's storms that I've gone through that I look back and I say, okay, Jesus brought purpose to every moment of that storm. When I was a youth pastor for 2 years, and then I actually kind of got burnt out, and then I actually left the ministry for a while. It was one of these things where I was devastated by it. It was like a storm that I didn't know how to face. There was a lot of anger in me. There's a lot of questions that I was going through. There's some things that I was going through. I'm like, why am I in this position, God? Why did you even bring me this far in the first place? But I look back, and I can see that Jesus brought purpose to every moment of that. As I left that position, I went with Pastor Conan, who started off this series, really. And I was able to go, and I was able to be a part of his team. And we launched a church in Pickerington called C3 Church. And it was just an incredible thing to see it grow. And out of that, I learned all these different things. In fact, out of that, it was really God tugging on our heart to even start Life Change Church. God used that season. God used that storm in my life, and He brought purpose to it so that we could all be a church together and love others to life change. God uses these things, and He brings purpose to our storm. I know when Sarah and I first got married, we were in this storm of really our finances. I've talked about it a little bit, but on paper, nothing made sense, right? We were always negative. We were in debt, like $80,000 in debt, and that's not even our house. Like that's like college loans, credit cards, car loans. I had like 3 cars, and I was one person. I don't know what was wrong with me, but like it was crazy. We had all this stuff, but man, we're going through this storm, and I look at it. God taught me a lot. Through this storm, God brought purpose to us. He taught us how to budget. He taught us how to give. He taught us how to sell things, like everything. If it wasn't breathing, it was, if it wasn't breathing, it was sold. We might have sold some things that were breathing too, but yeah, He uses these things, right? God brings purpose to our storm. And He wants to do this in each one of our lives. He wants to bring purpose to your storm. And this is how we do it. If we want Jesus if we want to experience this, if we want Jesus to bring purpose to our storms, number one, we have to respond with courage and not fear. Respond with courage and not fear. And courage is responding really with strength in the face of pain or grief. And that strength comes from Jesus. This is why Jesus in verse 20 he says, "It is I, don't be afraid." He was reassuring them, right? He's saying, it's me, it's myself, right? Don't be afraid. Find your strength, find your courage in me. Don't live in fear. Don't face this storm with fear. Don't be scared of me, right? Don't live in fear because of me, but take comfort in me. Don't be irrational, but instead face the problem with strength. Be bold. Be brave, even in the midst of a storm. 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 7 says this. It says, "For the Spirit God gave us does not make us timid, but gives us power, love, and self-discipline." What courage is really power, love, and self-discipline in action. Right now in your storm, how can you face it with power, love, and self-discipline? Maybe for you, maybe that means responding instead of having an attitude of defeat when you meet all these struggles, but have this attitude of victory. Maybe for you, that means instead of saying, "I can't," it means "we can." It means saying, "I can with your help, God," right? Maybe for you, instead of saying, "I will never," you say, "It will happen." That's what courage is. Respond with courage and not fear. Maybe for you, that means instead of being so negative about everything, maybe that even means instead of being hateful about the situation you're in, maybe that even means instead of being hateful about really towards the person that put you in that situation, you respond with optimism and compassion. Instead of blaming others for your problem, maybe that means you take ownership. Taking ownership of a problem is courage. That's courageous, right? Think about it. What can you take ownership of in the storm that you're going through? If right now you're financially a mess, maybe you need to take ownership of the fact that you have a spending problem. That's responding with courage. Right now, if you're physically out of shape, maybe you need to take ownership that you haven't made time in your day to work out. Maybe you need to take ownership with the fact that you haven't made conscious choices to make good decisions in what you eat. And listen, I'm talking to myself right now. But this is what it is, right? This is responding with power. This is what's responding with love. This is responding with self-discipline. For you, that may be instead of harboring this anger or this vengeance, like you want to hold on to this because you think it makes you feel better, maybe it means that you need to offer forgiveness. Who do you need to forgive in your life? The truth is that forgiveness may be the miracle that Jesus wants to do in your life anyways. That may be the purpose of your storm in the first place. Think about it. How can you react with courage this week? Maybe for you that just means being more self-disciplined. Maybe it means making a commitment, sticking to it. Maybe it means really setting up some guardrails in your life and then putting some people in place to keep you accountable with those, right? Each one of those things is really a step of encouragement. My challenge for you is to respond with courage and not fear. And then number 2 is to invite Jesus into the storm. Invite Jesus into the storm. Again, if you look through this series, invitation and obedience are some reoccurring themes that you're going to see through all this. Each miracle happens when we obey God, but each miracle also happens when we invite Jesus into the midst of the problem, right? When we invite Jesus into the storm. For him to do a miracle, we have to invite him into our lives. And not just a part of our lives, but even into the messiest parts of our lives, into our storms. And if you go with me to John 6:21, it says this. It says, then they were willing to take him in to the boat. Now, probably would have been a little bit messed up. They're like, oh, Jesus, hey, good to see you. Nope, no room in the boat. No, they actually had to be willing to take him into the boat. Again, Jesus could have made it to the shore, right? He was walking on water. He's gone 3 or 4 miles. What's another mile? But they invited him in. And because they invited him, they reached the shore as well. And it says immediately, once Jesus came in, immediately the boat reached where they were heading. The faster we invite Jesus into our storms, the faster he's going to bring purpose to that storm. I didn't say the faster the storm's going to be done, but the faster he's going to bring purpose to that storm. Invite Jesus into your storm. Invite Jesus into your life. Jesus brings purpose to our storms. And we need to respond with courage and not fear. And we need to invite Jesus into our storms. Let's pray.
Thank you for listening to the Life Change Church podcast. If you were here today and you were listening and you made a decision to follow Christ, we would love to hear about it. Or maybe you're here and you're listening and that God is asking you to make the next step with whatever that it is in your life. We would love to hear about it and partner up with you. If you would, go to www.mylifechangechurch.com and under the media section, please fill out the contact us information and let us know if you made a decision to follow Christ. Let us know what God is asking of you. And if you need prayer, we would love to partner up with you in prayer as well. We hope that you enjoyed the podcast and that it both encouraged and challenged you. Have a great week.